How many of us, well, let me just ask you, how many of you grew up in a perfect family? I'll just have a show of hands. Um, I'll wait a minute to give you time to think about it. Well, if you did grow up in a perfect family, then today's message is not for you. You can go ahead and check out for the next few minutes, half hour, however long we're having this. All of us had some measure of dysfunction in our family growing up. But I have some very good news. God not only loves the perfect families, He also loves the dysfunctional families. Can I get an amen on that one? And we all can relate to those issues, things that we may have um, encountered in our upbringing or seen in our family or whatnot. Today, we look at a family in the Bible and what we can learn from them because there was plenty of dysfunction in that family, as you'll see. And I pray that it will encourage all of us today. So let's go back to, like I said, chapter 25, and let's pick up some of the verses there that connect better with chapter 27. Give us some context. In verse 19, I said verse 24, but I meant to say verse 19. I was just making sure you were on the same page. So, verse 19 in chapter 25. Now, these are the records of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and the Lord answered him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is so, why then am I in this way?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb." And she may have said, "Oh, well, that explains a lot of the pain I'm having there, um, because there's two nations. That explains a lot. The two peoples shall be separated from your body, and one people shall be stronger than the other. And underline this, and the older shall serve the younger. That was not status quo, that was prophetic. Verse 24. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first one came forth red all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. And afterward his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. Notice it was 20 years of waiting, and Isaac prayed, and the Lord blessed. He certainly learned something from mom and dad about waiting, I'm sure, and what to do during that season of waiting. And so we see here Esau is in verse 25. He comes out red and hairy all over like a hairy garment. So what they name him? Hairy. That's right. Esau actually means hairy, so they named him Harry. Apparently that name is passed down, and we still have people today named Harry. Jacob, his name is Yaakov, which literally means heel catcher. Heel catcher, somebody who trips you up, um, a supplanter. And you would ask Rebecca and Isaac, why'd you name him that? It's not a very good connotation, not a good denotation, but why? Well, I like the name. Names are powerful, in this case prophetic, because the name supplant, or the name Jacob, means supplanter, and supplant means to supersede, especially by treachery, to trip up the plan by deception, by cunning, by cheating. And that truly is what we'll see happened. When the boys grew up, verse 27, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. That's going to be very relevant to our study. And when Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field and was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please, let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I am famished." Therefore his name was called Edom. And we will see that the nation of Edom will be in constant conflict with Israel. Edom simply means red. So he is already from the womb, there's already been a prophetic word that he is going to have conflict. They're going to have conflict with each other. And then he comes in from the field. He's famished. Let me have some stuff. Let me have some food. I don't care what it is. Many believe that it was just like lentil stew. Verse 31, but Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright, your right to being the firstborn. Sell it to me." That's the birthright. Esau said, "Behold, I'm about to die. So what use then is a birthright to me?" He's saying, if I die, it won't matter who has the birthright. I'll be dead. But was he really about to die? No. It's just that he had his priorities out of line. He didn't value the birthright. He didn't see it as something he needed to be concerned with. He just wanted to feed his body. Esau said, and Jacob said, verse 33, "First, swear to me." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. It doesn't say, therefore he despised it. It's saying this is how, and proof that he despised it. It's saying that based on what you just saw and how he disdained it, and he didn't think anything of it, thought lightly of it, it shows us that he despised it. So that's the scene and the heart behind Esau's perspective of his right as the firstborn. Go over to chapter 26, and we'll pick up where we left off, which is the last couple of verses of chapter 26. Verse 34 says, "And when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah." In other words, he married outside the clan, outside the nation of Israel, outside the parameters of what was really expected and really allowed. So he already is bringing grief to his parents. But I want you to notice something, and we'll come back to it late in our study today. The parents don't really confront him in that. They don't say, no, you can't do that. They were complicit with it. They allowed it. They were okay with it, apparently. But it says they brought grief. So they were sad about it, but they didn't confront him on it. They didn't confront their child's sin. So Esau gets married at 40 years old. That's what it says. Verse 34, he was 40 years old when he got married. Okay? Now, between verse 35 and chapter 26, verse 1 and chapter 27, about 35 years passes. So how old is Esau at this point? You can get your calculator on your phone if you need. 40 and 35, he's 75 years old. These are not youngsters. Now, granted, people did live longer, but these would be considered middle-aged men at the time, not teenagers. Sometimes we have this impression because there's this conflict between them because they're much younger. They're not. They're 75. And they're twins, so that would make Jacob also 75. That's right. That's right. So what we're going to see next is that Isaac, dad, is going to try to override the birthright. In spite of what God has said prophetically, in spite of what he knows is right, watch what Isaac does. Now it came about when Isaac was old, and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son." And he said, "Here I am." And Isaac said, "Behold, now I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, please take your gear and your quiver and your bow and go out to the field and hunt game for me and prepare a savory dish for me, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die." Now, I read that with some melodrama. Did y'all notice any melodrama there? I think he was kind of having a little melodrama. He might even be called a hypochondriac at this point. Just so you know, Isaac will live another 43 years after this. He will live another 43 years. Was he really as close to death as he thought he was? Maybe he was. But I just wonder, was he trying to work something here? Was he trying to manipulate the situation, trying to impose his will on the Lord? I think he was. Isaac knows, before we read on, Isaac knows God's will, but he wants to alter God's will. He's trying to override what he knows God has said. He's trying to trump God. Here's the thing. He's coming to a place, he's about to bless, he thinks, his son, the older. And in the Bible, blessings were prophetic. When someone blessed someone, they fully expected, and it happened, that God was going to do what was put forth in the blessing. You spoke the blessing, and you knew, you believed with all your heart that it was going to happen. And at that time, by the way, the blessing was given at a public gathering. Isaac's in his bed. He's at the house. He's doing this very secretively. In fact, we're going to see he doesn't even tell his wife what he is doing. Why? Because he knows it's not right. He's doing something deceptively under the radar because he knows it's not right. I'm not going to do a show of hands. Do we ever do that? Yes, it's in our nature to try to hide something when we think it's not right or when we know it's not right. It's in our nature. We don't want to get caught. The worst thing for a child is to get away with a lie. If we or when we catch our children not telling the truth, we confront that, and that is a huge blessing to them because we're able to say, let's stop this now, because what happens when you lie? You have to tell another lie to cover it up. And then what do you have to do next? You have to tell another lie to cover it up. And then they stack up so high. And here's what happens. Now get this before we continue. When we find ourselves deceiving someone else, we keep up with the real truth for a little while. But if it keeps on going and the layers add on to each other, it's like skin. What happens when a callus forms? Well, a layer gets on top of that wound, if you will, and it calluses. More and more layers build up. And then what happens? You could put a lit match, to that callus and barely feel it. You've become desensitized in that part of your skin because there's a callus there. Well, the same thing happens in our hearts. If we continue to lie and to deceive, now we're deceiving ourselves. We can't even find where the truth is. God forbid any of us have our hearts get to the place where we can't even remember what the truth is. But I believe there's a callus that has formed here in Isaac. He's saying, okay, I'm going to deceive because, well, I think it's the best thing to do because the firstborn's got to be the one with the birthright and the blessing. Birthright's gone, but maybe I can give the blessing. So, verse 5. Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt game to bring home, Rebekah said to her son, what did you see there in verse 5? It says Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son, underline that, his son Esau. Verse 6, Rebekah said to her son, you see a little favoritism there? Yeah, this dysfunctional family not only has deception, but they have favoritism, favoring one child over another. That should never happen. And parents must guard against that. Behold, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, saying, bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me, that I may eat and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, therefore, my son, listen to me. I command you, go now to the flock and bring me 2 choice kids from there, that I may prepare them prepare them as a savory dish for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall bring it to your father, that he may eat, so that he may bless you before his death. Rebekah knows God's will. Now, that should sound familiar. A moment ago, I said Isaac knows God's will, but wants to alter God's will, to override what God has said. Rebekah knows God's will, wants to do God's will, but she's thinking that God needs her help. This is getting too close. This is too much. How can God possibly stop this? I've got to step in and do something about it. When Saul was praying and waiting for Samuel, and they were facing a potential battle, and when Saul was king, and he was waiting for Samuel to come and pronounce the blessing and do the sacrifice and do what Samuel did. Well, Saul said, I can't wait any longer. And he went ahead and did it. Seconds later, seems to be in the Bible, maybe minutes, Samuel shows up and says, what is this you've done? He said, well, I couldn't wait for you any longer. We said, what you've done is brought doom upon yourself. You sealed your own fate. You've blown it. And Saul, of course, is all upset. But what Saul did was he was walking, of course, by sight, not by faith. He was walking in fear, not faith. And that's what we see here happening as well. Rebekah is saying, oh, no, wait, oh, no. And what happens when we're afraid? We feel like we're backed against a wall. We will use our own cunning, even if it's deception or whatever it may be, to try to get a way out. Rather than go looking up, we look out and look for that rescue rather than looking for the rescuer. We need to say, hey, God, I can't fix this, but you can. That's when our faith grows. How is our faith going to grow if we're always looking out for the solution instead of looking up? And he could have very well intervened. We don't know. What would God have done if Rebekah had not stepped in here? And Jacob being complicit with her plan and plot and saying, okay, we're going to partner in this deception and deceive Dad and get the blessing. What would God have done? What could he have done? We don't know. He could have stepped in. He could have done something. And I have a feeling he would have if they had sought him instead of seeking their own plan. And so, but they don't. They don't look up. Now, it reminds me the way that she is moving here and trying to work things and not wait on the Lord. Abraham surely taught Isaac, and Sarah too taught Isaac about their lessons they learned in waiting on God. And oh wow, we should have if we waited so many years because we were looking at the problem, not the promise. We looked at that the last couple of weeks. Abraham should have told his daughter-in-law what God told Abraham back in Genesis 18. Quote, is anything too difficult for the Lord? And that's a really good verse for us to encourage each other in. When our backs are against the wall, when we're on the phone with a brother or sister in the Lord, encouraging them, and they feel like they really don't have any other option. And just ask them, hey, is anything too tough for the Lord? Is anything too difficult for our Lord? Let's pray. Let's go to the Lord. Let's take this to Jesus and see what he will do. Give the Lord room to move, to work. We limit him by our unbelief when we try to work things out ourselves, just like Rebekah and Jacob are conspiring to do here. They are believers, by the way. They're believers in the Lord. They follow the Lord. They trust in the Lord many times, just as we do. But I like to say that Rebekah believes in God, but right now she doesn't believe God. She's a believer. She believes in God, but she doesn't believe God. She's not trusting God over her circumstances. The lesson for us is this, and we'll move on. God's work must be done God's way. If God's going to rescue, we've got to give him an opportunity to do that. If God's going to answer, we've got to ask. God's work must be done God's way. The cost of Rebekah moving and manipulating in this situation is going to be that Rebekah will never see her son again. And God's not punishing her for her sin here. She's just creating a mess by a very bad decision. Does God put them on the shelf and say, I'm done with you? I'm fed up with, no. They suffer consequences for the decision, but God still blesses. In fact, the Jacob she's conspiring with, he's going to be named Israel. That's still on the map today. He ended up having tremendous blessings in his life. And I believe his mom did too. There were consequences, but God is patient and gracious, compassionate and understanding. Verse 11. Then Jacob answered his mother, Rebekah, behold, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man. That's why we call him hairy, Mom. And I'm a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me. Then I shall be as a deceiver in his sight, and I shall bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. He's most concerned about bringing a curse upon himself and not a blessing. But I see something else here. It says, I shall be seen as a deceiver in his sight, in his eyes, in his perception. I believe Jacob now is more concerned about his reputation than about his character. He's more concerned about what people think than about what God thinks. Are we sometimes more concerned about what people think than what God thinks? Yes. It's called the fear of man. It says the fear of man will lead to a snare, a trap. Jacob's more concerned about his reputation than his character. Even though he is a deceiver at this point in his life, he is living up to his name. Supplanter, heel catcher, deceiver. Even though he is a deceiver, he does not want people to think he's a deceiver. Don't think of me that way, even though I am. But his mother said to him, your curse be on me, my son. You obey my voice. Go, get them for me. So he went and got them, brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory food, such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her elder son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the kids on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. She also gave, he must have been pretty hairy. This is a goat skin that we're talking about here. This is a goat hide. And he's saying, that's my boy Esau. Pretty hairy dude. She also gave the savory food and the bread which she had made to her son Jacob. Then he came to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? So he's suspicious already. And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau. Now, if you have a pen, if you want to make a note in your Bible margin there, right next to verse, that's lie number 1. Number 1, verse 19. I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, please. Sit up, and eat of my game, that you may bless me. So he is asking his dad to bless him because he's telling him he's Esau. And Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have it so quickly, my son?" And he said, line number 2, "Because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me." Do you hear a little sanctified disobedience there? A little holier than thou kind of thing. Oh, it was the Lord. It was the Lord who blessed me. Write this down. He tries to cover his sin with God talk. God talk. What's God talk? Oh, bless the Lord. How are you, my brother? Oh, God is good. God is good. But sometimes when someone has kind of that pretentious tone and verbiage with me, I mean, I'm nice enough to them, but I've got this kind of check here in my heart like, what are you doing? It doesn't, am I the only one? I mean, do y'all track with me on that? Just a little too plastique, and the God talk doesn't jive well. But that's what I see Jacob doing here. But because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me, bless the Lord. Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come close, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not." So he's still doubting, isn't he? So Jacob came close to Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of hairy." And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy, like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. And he said, "Are you really my son Esau?" You may want, this is number 3. And he said, "Yep, yepper, that's me, Dad. I'm Esau." With each lie, he has to tell another lie to cover the previous lie, and on it goes. So he said, "Bring it to me, and I will eat of my son's game, that I may bless you." And he brought it to him, and he ate, and he also brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said to him, "Please come close and kiss me, my son." Verse 27, so he came close, and he kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his garments. He said, "Well, he smells like outside." And he felt the goat's hair. He said, "Oh, he's hairy like my son." And he said, "See, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Now may God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and an abundance of grain and new wine. May peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you." You may underline that. How many other sons were there? Just one. "Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you." This is the blessing of Israel. This is the blessing that still today is upon the nation and people of Israel. They are blessed because this blessing went forth upon this young man at 75 years old, who has received and been pronounced to be the recipient of the blessing from God. Underline in verse 29, if you will, "May your mother's sons bow down to you." We're going to talk about in a few moments another brother whose brothers bowed down to him. another recipient of the blessing. So Isaac blesses Jacob, the deceiver, instead of Harry. Why? Why did Jacob receive the blessing? Well, because God said he would receive the blessing. That's right. God's will was done. But was God's will done God's way? No. Did God accomplish his will? Yes. But it was not done in the way God wanted it done. God could have, and I believe 100% would have, accomplished his will, even though it looked very much like Esau was going to get the blessing. Had they waited on the Lord, but they didn't. Jacob's going to learn a lesson. And this is, by the way, and I want you to write this down. This is a biblical principle. You've heard it in songs, you've heard it in secular songs, you've heard it in Christian songs. You ready? This is deep. What goes around? One more time. What goes around? That's right. What goes around comes around. In Luke 6, Jesus said, give, and it will be what? Given to you. That's a very positive perspective and evidence that what goes around comes around. There's also a negative. In Job chapter 4, verse 8, it says, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble will harvest the trouble and the iniquity. Jacob uses the hide of a goat and cooks the meat of the goat. And he also uses his brother's clothing to deceive his dad. Years later, Jacob himself will be deceived by his sons. In Genesis 37, I'll read it to you. It says this: Joseph's brothers took Joseph's tunic, and they slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in blood. And they sent the very colored tunic and brought it to their father and said, we found this. Please examine it to see if it is your son's tunic or not. They will use the blood of a goat and put it all over their brother's coat of many colors and break their father's heart. And what goes around comes around. Sadly for Jacob, he was a deceiver in his early years. In his latter years, named Israel, he still reaped some of the harvest that he had sown in deception. And perhaps there were other deceptions that his sons had seen. Either way, we see him really suffering the consequences of his own actions. So this is just an encouraging message for you today. There's some good stuff. Y'all stay tuned. Verse 30, now it came about as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had hardly gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. Then he also made savory food and brought it to his father, and said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me. And Isaac his father said to him, who are you? And he said, I'm your son, your firstborn, Esau. Then Isaac trembled violently. Why? Because he knew he could not take back the blessing. It was irrevocable. It was done. It was gone. He had put it out there, and it would prove to be a blessing to Jacob. And he said, who was he then that hunted game and brought it to me, so that I ate all of it before you came, and blessed him? Yes, and he shall be blessed. Isaac thought he was going to, in this chess match with the Lord, bless Esau instead of Jacob. God just checkmated Isaac because God wins. Did Jacob end up getting the blessing? Yes. Wasn't done God's way. He was blessed. When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, "Oh, bless me, even me also, oh my father." And he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing." Was that true? No. He did come deceitfully, but the blessing was his in the first place. So he's deceiving himself here and deceiving Esau. He took your blessing away. No, no, no. Esau, you never were the one to be blessed because God never said you were. The older shall serve the younger. That's from the Lord. Then he said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing." And he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" And by the way, too, now Esau is deceiving himself. He says, "He took away my birthright." No, 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 that's false. You despised your birthright. You showed that you despised your birthright. Here's the thing. Esau didn't want the blessing of the Lord. He wanted the stuff that the blessing gives. He was about feeding the flesh. And he's a picture of the flesh. As you look at human nature and all, and you study the Edomites and all, you can see that in Esau here and throughout the history of the Edomites as well. He wasn't interested in the blessing of the Lord and walking in his favor. He was interested in what he could get from the Lord due to the blessing. But Isaac answered and said to Esau, "Behold, I have made him your master, and all his relatives I have given to him as servants. With grain and new wine I have sustained him. Now as for you then, what can I do, my son?" The blessing, before we get into what he tells Esau here, he says in verse 33, he said, "I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." And he repeats it in a couple of different ways. In Isaiah 57, verse 19, it says this. It says, God speaking, he says, "I create the fruit of the lips, peace, peace to him that is far off and to him that is near, saith the Lord." Then Isaac, verse 39, verse 38, Esau said to his father, "Do you not have any one blessing?" He lifted his voice and wept. Then Isaac said to his father and answered, said to him, "Behold, away from the fertility of the earth shall be your dwelling, away from the dew of heaven from above. And by your sword you shall live, and your brother you shall serve. But it shall come about, when you become restless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck." And Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." And of course, that wasn't for another 43 years that his father died. Verse 40, "By your sword you shall live, and your brother you shall serve." We see in Hebrews 11, it says, "By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning the things to come." By faith, in the Hall of Fame of Faith, in Hebrews 11, it says, "By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau." Is that strange to you? Because it looks like he was doing it by deception. What that's saying is that when they knew that, because they got this from the Lord, that when they blessed, when a father blessed a child, it was by faith, meaning what I'm blessing you will happen. Did it happen according to what he said? 100%. We see the blessing on Israel, the nation. We see the blessing on Jacob's life. We see the blessing, or rather the curse, if you will, upon Esau's life. By faith, he blessed them. The blessing was prophetic because he believed that what he was speaking would happen. It was going to happen because he spoke that blessing. Over in Proverbs 18, it says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." Words are powerful. The blessing that we see here happened just as he said it. He spoke those words, and that's why it says, in faith or by faith, he blessed. As children of God, as vessels of the Holy Spirit, we have the privilege of speaking blessing over people. Not just God bless you, but in faith, hearing from the Lord, whether it be a prophetic word or whatever, or just speaking the word of God over someone, the Lord moves through that. The Lord answers that. Why? Because we're awesome? No, because of the blessing of God. He's simply using us as vessels to convey his blessing. So I like to say, we are blessed in order to be a blessing. That's why God blesses. We're blessed in order that we would be a blessing to someone else. Now, when the words of her elder son Esau were reported to Rebekah, verse 42, she sent and called her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Behold, your brother Esau is consoling himself concerning you by planning to kill you. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice and arise, flee to Haran to my brother Laban, and stay with him a few days until your brother's fury subsides, until your brother's anger against you subsides, and he forgets what you did to him." Yeah, right. "Then I shall send and get you from there. Why should I be bereaved of you both in one day?" Jacob ended up staying in Haran how long? Anybody remember? 20 years, not a few days. How long was it before Isaac died? 43 years. So once again, is Rebekah walking in faith or fear? She's walking in fear. Had he stayed there, Esau said he was going to console himself after dad was dead. Had he stayed, it's possible God would have worked something very different out. When we get ahead of the Lord, or we try to work it out ourselves, we don't give the Lord room to work it out on our behalf. The word says, wait on the Lord. Yes, wait on the Lord. That is easier said than done. Rebekah said to Isaac, "I'm tired of living because these daughters of Heth, of Jacob, takes a wife," and so forth. And again, that's where I believe chapter 28 should have started, so we'll pick it up there next time. I want to wrap it with these thoughts. Here's some observations of this family. We'll just say observations of a dysfunctional family. Number one, what do we see? Mom and dad do not communicate. Mom and dad were not communicating. Though they live in the same house, they're living separate lives. We never see them talking to each other, saying something like Isaac to his wife, "Hey, you know what? I'm thinking of blessing Esau instead of Jacob. What do you think about that?" We don't see that conversation. Communication, or the lack thereof, is the root of many of our problems. Number two, mom and dad play favorites. They played favorites. He had his favorite, she had her favorite. That's a problem. That was passed on. Jacob had Joseph. It was his favorite. The brothers knew he was his favorite, and they resented that to the point of being so angry that they feigned his death. Some of them wanted to kill him, the others talked him out of it. And then they still had that deception they picked up, inherited, if you will, and took it to dad and deceived them about Joseph's death. Playing favorites can also be passed down. Another thing we see is that mom and dad do not confront their son's sin. They didn't confront his sin. They didn't confront his sin about marrying the pagan wives. They didn't confront his sin at all, about his behavior, about wanting to take revenge on his brother. They didn't confront that. The result was that the sin will be passed on to the next generation. Now, I told you that this is mostly a discouraging chapter. Would you agree? I mean, you read this like, oh my goodness, thanks for the encouraging word today. Here's where we can learn the good side from Jacob's life. The word for us is, don't pass it on. If any of you is in Christ, he's a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. Beware of those old patterns that try to creep in and take things out of the Lord's hands and try to work things out ourselves. Determine in your heart, it stops here with my generation. It stops here with me. It stops here with my family. I'm not going to let that stuff that I saw or that I experienced continue in me or in my children. It stops. And here's where Jacob will encourage us. Jacob was confronted by the angel of the Lord. He was still a deceiver. He was still working things out on his own. He was still trying to think and manipulate the situation. And the Lord came face to face with him and wrestled with him. How long? All night. And he touched him in his hip socket. And for the rest of his life, he walked with a limp. Okay, so where's the good part? He changed his name. He changed his name from Jacob, deceiver, supplanter, to Israel. Israel means governed by God. Governed by God. It also means wrestles with God, because he did. One who wrestles with God. But the best understanding of the big picture of what it means and what we see in his life from then on is he was governed by God. Did he sin no more? No, I'm sure that he, just like us, found himself with thoughts and even actions that weren't in line with the Lord's will and weren't pleasing to God. But for the most part, his life changed that moment because he said, okay, I'm now going to live according to my new name, Israel. I am governed by God. As we find ourselves with our own baggage, as we call it, our own stuff that we've inherited, understand something. God's given you a new name. You are not your own. You've been bought with a price. And now he governs you by his Holy Spirit when you yield. When I yield. When we yield to him and say, okay, God, you saved me. You rescued me. Lord, I need you to rescue me and save me right now. In this situation, in this problem, in this crisis, in this panic, in this fear. And remember, he knows you by both names. He knows your weakness, but he knows your new name in which you walk in his strength. And he loves you, all of you, warts and all, because he's full of grace and mercy. He's abounding in loving kindness. So let's resolve that it stops here, that it stops with our generation. Why? Because he's given us a new name. And in that, we are governed by God. Amen? Amen. Let's all stand and pray. And Lord Jesus, as we look at this record of some people just like us, on the one hand, we are sad when we hear of the separation in this family that resulted from them trying to do your will in their way. On the other hand, Lord, we're encouraged because you stepped in and you didn't leave Jacob to his own devices. You stepped in and you changed his name. And by changing his name, you changed his nature. And you've done that for us, Lord, when you saved us. And it is up to us, Lord, each day to yield to your wisdom, strength, power, and love. Lord, I thank you for this family of believers. I thank you for their love for the word. And I pray now, Lord, your blessing on them, and that you keep us all till we meet again. Through Jesus we pray. Amen.